Hello and welcome to my little series on the full Strixhaven release. Or I believe this list is now full. I might be wrong. This will be a little multi-part series that we'll just use the actual Magic the Gathering site and the I guess the breakdown here as the sort of guidelines of what we're going to break it up in. For example, this video will be on white, the next will likely be on blue, then black, etc. down and down the road, although we'll probably condense some of these into other lists here. Well, I will. That's the beauty of editing. Also, the mystical archives will not be included in this little list, as you can see up here, since I already have a video on the full mystical archive release. So I think that's all the real setup I need to do. I'll attempt to go pretty quickly through this. Of course, we'll start with white, and before we start it, one last little thing is in very old videos I used to try and give a star rating kind of thing, but anymore I realize that that's a limiting kind of factor, so I'll just talk about the card and how I think it might impact the MTG historic best of 3 metagame. Though, say if a card's clearly good for Commander or something, or cards like the Lessons that are very good in best of 1 with the Learn mechanic, I might slightly note on those. Now, we can get to all of the cards in question. Starting with Academic Probation. 1 and a white for sorcery that's a lesson. Choose 1. Choose a non-land card name. Opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name until your next turn. Or we can choose target non-land permanent. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. This might see some... I imagine this will only ever really be a sideboard card in best of 3. Again, Lessons, I believe, can be tutored up from Learn... Or Lesson cards can be tutored up with Learn cards or something. So it's good in best of 1 formats on Arena. So there's that. But I think this might be a good sort of... we'll call it a silver bullet sideboard card. If particularly problematic cards come into play, or we're really worried about like or if you're worried about one big Voltron up thing, you might run some Academic Probation. It'll probably see some fringe sideboard play. Next, Aegis Guardian, 1 and a white for a 1/4 Spirit Soldier. It's fine. I mean, it'll probably be good in draft, or or a limited format if you're playing that. It's a good budget card, and hey, as a person who loves his tribal, spirits technically exist in the format, so meh. Again, this is a good teaching card, or a limited card, but I don't think we'll see a whole lot of constructed play outside of maybe budget. Next is Beaming Defiance. Pardon my yawning. Beaming Defiance is 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains hexproof until end of turn. This card could actually see some fringe play. If single target removal becomes the very popular thing, this is kind of a white version of a Veil of Summer or any one of those green sort of slipper removal spell effect. So I can see this seeing some fringe play. You won't see a lot of it. I don't think it'll become some crazy main board thing, but it'll see some play. Next is Clever Lumimancer. 1 white for a 0/1 human wizard with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, Clever Lumimancer gets +2/+2 until end of turn. I'm on the fence about this since, for reference, I do still, before this video came out, I, like most people, if I happen to catch a spoiler on, like, Reddit or something, you know, I wouldn't, like, you know, spoiler owl and turn away. Like, I paid attention to it. Clever Lumimancer is sort of rattling around in my head, since, provided I get the cards, I'm thinking I want to maybe make some sort of, like, Boros burn deck. Since, I think with, like, a Soulscar Mage and maybe even the Clever Lumimancer as another 1-drop, it might help push that deck up a little bit. But I'm not totally sold on the Lumimancer, but I could be wrong, and so yeah, I think it could see some play in very Storm heavy decks, or, you know, Magecraft heavy decks, but I don't think other than that you'd ever run it, and even then, it's shaky. Combat Professor. 3 and a white for a 2/3 bird cleric with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains vigilance. I mean, it's fine. It's one of those, yeah, it's fine. I mean, good budget card. It's technically a cleric, and that's a tribe with some support, and there is technically bird love in the format, but that's very minor. I would be surprised if this card sees a whole lot of play outside of, like, teaching or, like, limited play, or, like, a budget kind of card. Next, defend the campus. 3 and a white for an instant. Choose 1 creature you control, get +1/+1 until end of turn, or destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. This is okay, actually. They might see some play. It'll be fringe. Normally, this is one of those, because of the instant speed and the modal nature of the card, i.e. having multiple options, like, to do with the card. It takes it from the aforementioned teaching card level to, like, might see some fringe play. So yeah, defend the campus is fine. It might see some fringe play. Next is the Tension Vortex. 1 white for an aura. Enchant non-land permanent. It can attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be. And 3, destroy the Tension Vortex, but only your opponents may activate this. In Historic, I don't think this will see a lot of play. The only thing that it might, and boy, that is a iffy might, is in maybe some sort of black-white auras deck as a sort of removal spell. Or removal spell, but I am not, like, sold about it. I think this is in, like, the teaching tools are limited removal sort of bin. Next will be Devastating Mastery. 2 and 4 white for a sorcery, or you may pay 2 and 2 white rather than pay the spell's mana cost. If you pay the cheap version, an opponent chooses 2 non-land permanents and returns them to their owner's hand. Destroy all non-land permanents. I get. I mean, maybe if they're running a whole lot of, like, non-creatures that you want to, like, sweep away, you might run Devastating Mastery. But there are so many white sweepers in the format that if you are concerned about creatures killing you, there are so many more better options. But if somehow the meta goes to a weird non-creature, non-land, permanent heavy thing, it might see play. What, Carmel? Hi, baby girl, I love you. Daddy trying to do something, little tiny brown sugar, baby. My little fluffy baby girl. Come here. Oh, there goes that. Ow. What did you knock off? Pardon. Terribly unprofessional. Anywho, next. Dueling Coach. 3 and a white for 2/2 human monk. Enters the battlefield, put 1/1 on target creature. For 4 and a white and tap it. You can put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. This card is very bad. They will only possibly see very fringe play if green-white +1/+1 counters happens to super take off, which it almost certainly won't, but I could be wrong. And the only other thing I could think of is maybe Evolve, that Ravnican mechanic. That's in Simic. Might make use of this, but other than that, you'll never see it. It's a teaching card. And that's about it. Next is Eager First Year. 1 and a white for a 2/2 human wizard with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy, instant a sorcery, +1/+0 until end of turn. It's fine. Again, it's a good teaching tool. Maybe if you really want to like lean hard on some like white-based wizard deck, which might, it's just a thing that could exist in the format. You might run this card. But other than that, it's like a good teaching card or limited card. Next is Elite Spellbinder, a card that most people have probably already seen, but still, we'll take a look at it. 2 and a white for a 3/1 human cleric with flying. When it enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land from it. As long as that card remains exiled, its opponent can play it, but has to pay 2 more. This card might see play. Maybe. If some sort of human deck, well, I would say if some sort of human deck would pop up in Historic, but that's, you have to run like Orzhov humans at least. So if you're running non-black and you want a little bit of hand hate, but it's more of hand tax, Elite Spellbinder is good. I'm not convinced it's going to be an all-star, but it might see some play. Next is Expel, 2 and a white for an instant. Exile target tapped creature. It's fine. It's cheap conditional removal. It's a very good teaching tool. The exile clause can be more relevant than one would think. Yeah, it's fine. It'll see some fringe play. Next, Guiding Voice. 1 white mana, put a 1/1 counter on target creature, and with Learn. Okay, so this is how this mechanic works. When you may reveal a lesson card you own from outside the game and put it into your hand, or discard a card and draw. This will only see play really in best of 3 as if a 1/1 counters deck, or maybe a Boros Feather deck might really like this. But that's it maybe, and for reference, I'll talk about the Learn fetching lessons from the sideboard. If you're playing best of 1 on Arena, this allows you to access your sideboard in a format where you normally cannot. Granted, they can only be lesson cards. So it might see some play. If you're running mono white, you might actually just like a loot effect. But I'd be very surprised if this sees a lot of play, since mono white doesn't see a lot of play. Next, Leonin Light Scribe. 1 and a white for a 2/2 cat cleric. Whenever you cast Magecraft, again, cast or copy, instant or sorcery. Creatures get +1/+1 until end of turn. I mean, maybe. This is one of those, I would say this might work in a mono white, like kind of a weenies deck. but you don't really want to run a whole lot of instants or sorceries in that deck. You'd rather run more dudes. So you're kind of like pulling in two directions a little bit, though it can work. This card might see some play. Hell, maybe in some weird cat tribal deck, which would be fun. Or clerics. So I imagine Lillian and the Light Scribe here might see some fringe play. But I'd be surprised if it's anything ever more than fringe. Next is Mavinda, Student's Advocate. 2 and a white for a 2/3 legendary Bird Advisor. Flying, and for 0 mana you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell does not target a creature you control. It costs 8 more to cast this way. If that spell would be put into your graveyard exile instead, and you can only activate it once each turn. I mean, I like the flavor-wise. This card makes perfect sense. You don't want to. They don't advocate for sort of like particular harm against its students. Mavinda does, and that's reflected in the 8 mana cost if it targets one of your own students. Flavor-wise, it works really well. This actually isn't awful. This might actually see some play in some blue-white control decks that might want to get extra copies of your Absorbs or Dovin's Veto. Because I believe this can be activated at instant speed. Spellcast exile, activate only once per turn. So being able to counter a spell and then get another copy of that same counterspell after it resolves on each turn is actually fairly... This card might actually be a low-key sleeper in your, like, control decks that run white. I'd actually be on the lookout for Mavinda here. So yeah, this one I think is a sleeper and has real potential to be like a format staple. Next, Pilgrim of the Ages. 2 and a white for 2/1 Spirit. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for basic planes, reveal it in your hand, then shuffle. And for 6, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. If you're playing a mono-white commander in Brawl or in traditional EDH, you're going to love this. Could it potentially see play in some sort of mono-white spirits? Maybe, but you don't really run that deck because that deck doesn't really exist. So yeah, I don't see this ever seeing play, ever. This is a teaching card in Historic Best of 3, but actually pretty good if you're running mono-white commanders. So, next, Pillar Drop Rescuer, 4 and a white, 2/2 Spirit Cleric with flying, enters the battlefield, return target creature with mana value 3 or less from graveyard to hand. That's not awful. A little bit of recursion is nice. Spirits, again, are a tribe that actually could revive or pick back up a lord from the yard and put it back into their hand. So it might see some play. The cleric part is more relevant than one would think. I could see this card actually seeing fringe play in some tribal decks, or maybe even some combo decks that need like your Emeries. For example, a combo deck that runs like an Emery where you can get back an Emery from the graveyard to the hand as a sort of, what's that word? Like an Eternal Witness, but for cheap things, or cheap creatures is kind of nice. I could see this card seeing some fringe play. Maybe, probably in some combo decks or its relevant creature types. Let's see. Professor of Symbology. 1 and a white, 2/1, core cleric. Enters the battlefield, learn. Again, this card is good in best of 1, maybe if you're running mono white, but not in any other circumstances. Reduced to memory is a lesson, so it can get fetched off of them. But anyhow, yeah, we'll not talk about or I'll try not to harp too much on that. Reduced to memory, 1 and 2 white for a lesson. Sorcery, exile target non-land permanent. A controller creates a 3/2 red and white spirit token. You know, actually, I could see this lesson seeing some play. If you want to exile, say, your opponent's, you know, big old honkin' Emrakul or whatever Eldrazi's in the format, whose name escapes me, and you want, like, a good budget way to do that, and you care about your instant and sorceries for either Magecraft or Storm, I could see this card seeing some play. It's kind of like a core Spirit Dancer that hits bigger things. So I could actually see this seeing some degree of, like, common play. Sorry, one sip. Secret Rendezvous. We've talked about... Plenty of people have talked about this card, so I'll be quick. 1, 2 white, sorcery. You and target opponent each draw 3 cards. I suppose if you're really desperate in Historic Best of 3 for card draw in your mono white deck, you can technically run this, but I would not do this. I'd actually rather run cards that learn, since you benefit more from that. Secret Rendezvous, much like that Get a Plane Spirit we talked about earlier, is good in Commander, in multiplayer formats, and that's about it. You can technically run it if you really want some card draw, but I would, again, prefer you run things with learn, and you just, you know, loot, basically. Semester's End. 3 and a white for an instant. Exile any number of target creatures and/or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of the next end step, return each of them to the battlefield under owner's control. They enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 if it's a creature, or an additional loyalty if it's a planeswalker. I think of this as sort of like sweeper protection. Yeah, it's like a good sweeper protection, and sort of like a white collected company a little bit, but you already have to play it. I think this card will actually see a good degree of play. I imagine if you're running white and you want some board sweepers, you'll be torn between this and Teferi's Protection coming in the Mystical Archive. I think this card has real potential. Next, Show of Confidence. 1 and a white for an instant. When you cast this spell, copy it. For each other instant or sorcery spell you've cast this turn, you may choose new targets for the copies. Storm. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature. It gains vigilance until end of turn. It will only really ever see play in +1/+1 counter decks. I don't think there's any other reason to run it at all. If you're running it, again, that's the only time, or sorry, in +1/+1 counter, or some, if you're splashing white in your Simic Evolve, or whatever that mechanic is. Hi, sweetheart. Sparring Regiment. Pardon me, I'm an idiot. 2 and a white for an enchantment. Enters the battlefield learn. When you attack, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature and untap it. Actually, that's not bad. Again, learning is nice to where it can give you some card draw or selection if you want to talk about it. So that's actually pretty good for an enchantment. Whenever you attack. Wait, how is that worded? Whenever you attack, put a 1/1 counter on a target attacking creature and untap it. Oh, I thought it was for each individual creature. Okay, that's actually not that good. I thought it was like each creature, then that would have been actually very good in just any generic. Again, much like Show of Confidence, it might see some play in +1/+1 counter decks, but even then, they kind of want to go a little wide, and Sparring Regiment does not work very well with that. I would be surprised if this sees much play at all. There's probably some weird, goofy combo potential with it, being able to untap something. But yeah, it'll see fringe play, if any. You probably shouldn't play this card. Star Pupil. 1 mana, 0/0, enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it. And when it dies, you put its counter on target creature you control. This is some nice little glue early on to help the 1/1 counters uh, build not like totally crumble, being able to cash in, or well, being able to retain those +1/+1 counters after its death is actually pretty relevant. I could see this if you're running it. If this somehow becomes, again, the +1/+1 counter thing becomes a real common thing, I could see Star People being a like very integral part to that deck working. Next is Stonebinder's Familiar. 1 white for Spirit Dog. Wow wow. 1 mana 1/1 Spirit Dog. Whenever one or more cards are put into exile during your turn, put a 1/1 counter on Stonebinder's Familiar. This ability triggers only once each turn. I mean, it's a dog, so that pack leader card has another actual legit dog to buff up. I'm not... I don't know if this is that good. Again, +1/+1 counter synergy, but it's like conditional +1/+1 counter where you gotta jump through what I believe to be too many hoops for that to work. But maybe I could be wrong. But I don't have a whole lot of faith in this other than, like, if you're trying to force dog tribal to work, this is technically a dog. Let's see. Next is Stonerise Spirit. 1 and a white for a spirit, a 1/2 spirit bird with flying. 4 mana. Exile the card from your graveyard. Target creature gains flying until end of turn. I mean, okay, I see the synergy, like, right next to each other, and that's good, but you have to get a 1-drop and a 2-drop, one after another, or basically on this board at the same time. So you already have to spend 3 mana to get it going. And you have to pay 4 mana to exile. Maybe Stonebinder's Familiar on a quick note. If it happened for each time, and not only triggering once per turn, I could see this card actually seeing some play. But, yeah. Stonerise Spirit, I don't see it. I don't think you even want it in Spirit or Birds. This is a teaching card or limited. Next, Strict Proctor. 1 and white for a Spirit Cleric. 1/3 flying. Whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter it unless they play 2. If for some reason some weird Anointed Procession style decks start popping off, then you'll run some Strict Proctors. Actually being a spirit could be sort of relevant as well as a cleric. Strict Proctor has some legs here. I see some hope for it, but it'll be fringe. It might only ever exist in sideboards, but it will technically exist. Let's see. Next is... Ooh, we're actually done with white. Next is Study Break. 1 and a white for an instant. Tap up to 2 target creatures. You can... and then learn. I mean, these effects, like, almost never really see play. The learn is better, but yeah, this is one of those, it's a teaching card or limited. I don't think this card will ever really see play, as they never have historically. And the, what's it called? The last white card is Thunderous Orator. 1 and a white for a 2/2 core wizard with vigilance. When it attacks, it gains flying until the end of the turn. Same is true if you control a creature with flying. First strike, double strike, death touch, lifelink, indestructible. I mean, weirdly, maybe some weird shenanigans with an Orator and a Crystalline Giant being able to basically become a keyword soup of a monster. Maybe this will be like, will this be some synergy with those 2 cards? So, there's that. So, that will be all of the white cards. Next, we'll go to the blue cards, but that'll be for another video. Thank you all for watching. Liked if you liked the video, sub if you like me, and if you have your own thoughts of what you think certain cards might be great, other ones might be crap, Hey, that's what comments are for. Just keep it civil. Thank you, and remember, I'm pulling for you. We're all in this together.